Hello, everybody, and indeed, welcome to today's underscore session. I'm not usually the host of this, but we have a special episode where we're going to have two executives dive into a study of other executives. Today, you're joining Executive Priorities for Education and Enablement. Today's session is part of a research report that we have concluded with Gatepoint Research, which we'll talk about. It's 150 customer and partner education enablement leaders who responded to a series of 6 questions. And this is basically a readout of that report. We will include a link so that you can download that report and walk away with it today. But if you'd like a short narrative readout of that report, we'll have a dialogue today between myself and Doug. Speaking of myself, my name is David Pitta. I'm the new CMO over at Intellum. I've been here, I joined this year, but I have 25 years experience in sales and marketing. And I'm very excited to be part of this education-led growth movement that we're seeing in the market. And today I'm joined by Doug Barth with Gatepoint Research. Hello, Doug.
Hey, how are you, David?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for joining.
If you'd like me to go right in, I'm going to talk about Gatepoint, and then we're going to zip into the research. But Gatepoint has been deploying executive surveys into the market since 1997. We get about 30,000 executives a year to participate in these surveys. And the goal of the surveys is to learn about technology trends and really quite in a granular way what these executives are planning to adopt and how they plan to improve their current operations. So we were engaged by Intellum, and we're going to talk about what we found out. So I'm going to go right in and talk about the methodology that Gatepoint uses. It starts with identifying who we want to take our surveys. In this case, we went after very senior executives, and we offer these executives primarily via email a very honest offer. Give us a few minutes of your time. Tell us about what you're currently planning to do in your organization. Tell us about your pain, what you're planning on fixing, what needs to be improved. And we succeeded in getting a really nice, robust number here, 152 respondents, all within the United States, all participated voluntarily. And we ran this earlier this year between January and April. And the candidates primarily were invited via email. And we're going to go over what we learned today. So this departs a little bit from Gatepoint's typical surveys. We got very senior executives to participate. As you can see, over half were C-level executives, 51% were CXO. And then right behind that, 15% were VP, and the balance, 34%, were directors. So 100% of the people who took this survey were director level and above. And ultimately, we selected this rarefied audience because we wanted to talk to them about education and enablement programs, which ultimately report up to these executives. So we're going to talk about how education programs are linked to broader business objectives. And David, why is that important?
Well, as we go to the next slide, really what we wanted to understand was where customer and partner education, where the priorities are. And what we found in this data set was not surprising. It was very similar to some Forrester report data that we published this year as well, which is that education, as it's defined, customer and partner, is continuing to span the full customer lifecycle, with increasingly these teams and these initiatives wanting to be connected right up into new customer acquisition, all the way at the top of the customer lifecycle, through to even the early phases of product adoption and after customer acquisition through upsell and cross-sell, while continually kind of really being focused on grow. But the big difference here, and we're seeing this also with our customers, and these are some of the the logos that you see on our website, is that the number one business priority is really to grow and retain, and that is a shift that Intellum has seen over the years, where for a long time, customer education, partner education has really been focused on retain and then maybe grow. and now it's kind of shifted to education-led growth as a strategy where it's grow, retain, and grow again. And the last thing I'll focus on here with this data point is what we're seeing is the groupings of really the priorities from these executives are now really bubbling up and focus more on what business outcomes they want to achieve versus in the past where we've seen it really be connected to education outcomes, things like skills and complacency, maybe scaling customer success or reaching product adoption. And if we move to the next slide, as we think about really business outcomes, the way that we at Intellum think about them are really in these four quadrants, where we see a lot of the start for customer and partner education come through with really how can we reduce costs? Really, how can we reduce content creation costs? How can we reduce support costs? How can we reduce onboarding costs? Often leads right into performance, like how do we improve ramp to time value, goal attainment, skill proficiency. But now, as you've seen on the previous slide, all of this is bubbling upstream into growth. How can we grow revenue? How can we grow product activation? How can we grow active users within our ecosystem? As well as continued focus around retention, reducing churn, improving sentiment, increasing product adoption. So this is interesting because it's all coming together, but education, as we're going to talk about further in today's talk of the data readout, isn't really, all of these business outcomes are owned by oftentimes 3, 4, or maybe even 5 different groups. So this is where we're at that point where it's like, where do these business outcomes sit in the leadership and within the executive teams? So we'll talk a little bit about that further. And as we go into really the next question, Doug, it was about
Yeah.
effectiveness.
Yeah, I'll talk about this for a bit. We asked these leaders how effective their educational programs are with regards to supporting their business goals. And as you can see, about 3/4 of the respondents gave a very emphatic yes. But as you can see at the other end of the scale, a lot really questioned the effectiveness. So David, how would you define effectiveness? How do you read this data?
Well, effectiveness in education, I mean, Intellum's strong point of view for as long as it's been around is your ability to tie the education to business impact. So, we talked about business outcomes. Those are the business impact that businesses are seeking to achieve. What this question, this is always a tough survey question, as you know, Doug, because right when you open it up, like, well, do we all identify with the same business goals? Are we talking business outcomes? Are we talking educational objectives, which could be misconstrued and maybe in how we ask this question? But also, what's often the case, and even in other audiences, is just effectiveness. Effectiveness has such a wide range of how it's measured and what it means. When I look at this chart, for me, what it tells me is that I kind of would expect people that would respond to a survey are probably having more success than those that were others would not as it comes to customer and partner education. But if I take out that kind of high range bias, it feels like a lot of people in this space trying to reach these business outcomes are just riding middle line. And that tells me often the case is that they're challenged with obstacles in measuring the effectiveness, but they're not ready to throw it out. Like there's value in the system. They know it, they feel it, they can see the impact. They just don't know how to effectively measure it, which is interesting coming from a marketing perspective. And I know you kind of have been on the front end of customer acquisition in your career, Doug. It's like in marketing, it's very easy to measure effectiveness, right? We've been attached to CRM and to the dollar and to the opportunity pipeline creation for so long that it's easy to measure. And you've got this wide range of this audience, which is the entire market. And then when it comes to customer education, you've got this finite audience of customers and these high impact situations and limited tolerance for risk and damaging those relationships, right? And so it becomes a whole different beat, and many different teams, it becomes a whole different beast. But what I can say is that there is a combination between what marketing has learned on the front end and what customer education needs, where these two teams, in my opinion, need to come together. And when we talk about who owns those business outcomes, it is, in my opinion, a combination of these teams coming together so that everyone's leveraging the same tools and that the effectiveness is being measured the same way. And speaking of metrics, if we just go to the next slide, this is an area that Intellum is continuing to invest in helping the market to better understand. And it would be a miss for me not to mention a fantastic summit that the team has put together for just a couple of weeks away from this live date in early September. And I'd invite everyone that's here that is maybe struggling on that middle line, who wants to better define what success looks like in terms of education metrics, to join us at that summit. There'll be a link below where you can do that.
Yeah, we're going to drill a little bit into a deeper layer here. If we can just go beyond this for half a second, where we've asked the executives on the next slide. Yeah, we asked these executives which teams currently are developing training materials to educate their customers and their partners on products and services. And look at that, customer education is almost half of the respondents selected that, with product marketing also way up there, professional services. So all of these teams are leveraging education and training materials to develop that deeper bond.
Yeah, and I've come from a business that was, a decent sized business on its way, crossing, over 100 million and growing before it was acquired. And I could tell you, we didn't have a formalized customer education, and it wasn't until I'd really seen what some of these leading companies are doing with customer and partner education, where there is a good reason when you get to a level of maturity where you need to define a function that does this. This is a different set of individuals. Where marketing is designed to maybe go a mile wide, inch deep, this team uses a set of tools, technologies, and really the talent around the creation of learning experience is entirely different. They need to go an inch wide and a mile deep. And that is really the sign of when you get to that level of maturity where you do have a team called customer education that is developing those learning experiences for you. That said, it's never done alone. Even with companies we've seen that have large dedicated teams, they're often pulling from other teams. And that's why education is there. They are there to really develop and establish the templates and the standards and the best practices so that this cross collaboration can work. So that's at the top end of the maturity model, we would say. What we're seeing through here is that it's almost like everyone owns it, right? And then no one owns it is kind of the challenge. But it really, I think, is just a layer of maturity. The next layer down would be probably multiple departments. Some of these top ones you're seeing: sales, enablement, product marketing, certainly customer success and support, equally, all of them trying to uphold those business outcomes. Again, it becomes challenging to rate effectiveness when you define education as a whole, when all of these different teams are trying to uphold all of these outcomes. And then the bottom of the maturity cycle is oftentimes people are trying to get out of, which is just really the ownership of this might just be one team. And it might be one team so far away from what those top end goals are that they have, where this is where education starts to fall short in a lot of organizations.
Let's move on. Yeah, on this one, we put the executives on the spot. We asked them which education capabilities are really currently driving success. And as you can see, developing high quality training content was the big winner here, followed closely by enabling customers to self-service, educate themselves. And personalized content, that's key to anyone who is involved with either customer service or sales. So this probably doesn't come to any surprise to you.
It doesn't. The one thing I think we wanted to understand the most was to ensure there was really no disconnect between what these education executives defined as the capabilities needed to reach success, that they were the capabilities that their team and their audiences need. And so what's reassuring to see is that, in fact, the respondents are in line, I believe, with what the admins and the content authors need within the teams in order to be successful. And that is right now developing high quality training content. Developing high quality content has been and will always continue to be the obstacle in front of scale for a lot of the customers that are trying to reach a high level of maturity and how education is driving growth. From there, so that's in line. That's perfect. That's where we want to see the focus being, because that is going to have the most impact at getting them into scale. Next is just a collection of items I think that are resonating with high degree of fidelity with the learning experience and what the audience needs. So the first thing all audience need and expect in today's world is to be able to self-service and self-accelerate their learning journeys. But once they get that motivation and that desire to enter into that, they expect a high quality experience, which is personalized for them and is really driving them from a a learning path to a business outcome. And that's a tricky thing to do. But those are what, in terms of what we saw as a response and what we've seen in other responses of data sets we've collected, is that those continue to be the drivers. And it's really good to see executives align with what the team and the audiences need.
Yeah, this is, it hasn't always been this way. This slide is really reflecting a relatively recent trend. Let's move on.
Yeah.
So we had a little bit of fun with this. We explored how artificial intelligence is being used to support these education initiatives. So we're going to go right in here and we asked the audience, do you foresee any obstacles to the adoption of AI to support customer and partner education? And as you can see, reliability of the AI output, the vast majority selected that. That's not a surprise. I think we all have a little bit of a creepy feel about AI, and we all look to it as the future at the same time. But also very high marks were given to a concern about the learning curve and people really lacking the understanding of the possibilities and the potential of AI. And then we get to another concern, security and legal constraints. David, you want to talk about how this is playing out?
Yeah, there's two things we were trying to get at. One was like, what are the obstacles you foresee as we're reviewing here, and what is the impact? Two very different things, but they correlate, which you'll see. It's really no surprise to me that the reliability of the output is so suspect, because if you think about how we all got our hands on AI, we all got our hands on a large language model that was only trained on publicly available data, right? And it was novel to do impressive things at that level, and we all got to touch it. And then once we get into like putting that into our work, where all the intellectual property is behind closed doors and these models are not trained, and yet products are implementing the ability for these inputs to be collected, unreliable inputs, untrained inputs get unreliable outputs. And that's what we've seen at Intellum. We for years have been taking I'd say a measured, rightfully so, a measured approach to this, because we are in the customer and partner education space, where it is a very sensitive space, and how AI and really how the experiences as a whole will impact your very important audiences here. So we take a little bit of a measured approach to it. We have an AI council that we've been meeting with for years that is filled with experts that are helping to get their hands on early models that we're developing. The way that we see it is certainly that you've got to get the inputs right. You've got to be able to work off of the right source material. You got to be permissioned to use that. And then you got to reliably create derivatives or refreshments of existing content that can be built into new experiences before AI is going to reliably be able to work with these types of audiences. So that's no surprise to me, and we're excited to continue to invest in this space. And we'll talk about really some of the impact that we found in our early working. The other thing I'll mention is that it's also no surprise to me when I see this reliability of AI output being a challenge, when the next thing is like, well, we're not really fully sure how to use it, right? So it's like, okay, well, there's a correlation again. Untrained users, untrained models, untrained inputs will continue to produce reliably untrained outputs. So until that's fixed, we don't necessarily see this changing. One thing we are doing is continue to invest in that learning curve, using both our learnings with our council, with the AI that we've been releasing over the year, to also hosting online content like we did in June, an AI summit, which we'll put a link to that summit. Encourage everybody to go and engage in that. And it will continue to help the learning curve issue here, as well as getting the inputs right to get better outputs. And the next opportunity where we're going to be talking about AI is going to be at a summit that we're going to be doing in early October as well, which hopefully we'll put a link to and have you join us there as well.
Cool. Well,
The last question.
AI is exciting, and we can't think of it as a threat. We asked, how do you envision AI impacting your customer and partner programs and initiatives in the future? And kind of a classic one, accelerating the creation of content was the #1 application they foresaw. AI as a learning assistant, personalizing these learning paths. This is the potential beauty of AI.
Yeah. And the way I see this, Doug, I know we're going to close off here, but this is a good ending to what we're trying to get at, is that all of these are ultimately rooted back into achieving some level of business outcome. And the first one everyone is focused on, and rightfully so, is how can we make our teams more efficient? This maps back to what does success look and capabilities, and that is high quality content creation. That's what the content authors are telling us. So this is an area where we know, as well as others expect, that the impact will be huge. And we've got big goals in Intellum to see content creation efficiency improve 10x in the short term and continue to improve. And again, that all maps back to being in a space where we've got to be able to have the right permissions and access to the source content so that we can produce reliably good outputs on new content. The
Cool.
second categorization, I'll just mention one other thing, is in addition to how AI will improve content creation acceleration for teams, the next thing that buyers are expecting is really, where will AI play a role in those learning paths? How can we get better at the personalized learning journeys, create a better experience for our users so that the users and the systems know where they're at in that customer lifecycle journey that everyone's trying to get after, how we can take them from a learning path to a business outcome, and then ultimately last, how we will use that data and how they can use that data and how AI will improve the use of that data so that we can have more measurable and effective impacts of customer education. So that's going to conclude our readout today. Doug, I really appreciate you helping conduct this survey and gathering these insights and sharing my time today.
Thank you, Dave.
On this webinar. For everyone else joining us, we're going to conclude. What I would do is I want to invite you to just scroll down below this video player, whether you're watching this live or on demand, and give us some feedback. You can rate the content, add comments or suggestions, whatever further content you want. The team looks at every rating and every piece of feedback, so we appreciate that. So thank you again for everybody joining us for Underscore today, and we look forward to you joining us next month. Cheers.
Thank you.